Have you ever noticed how quickly we click on those "what type of bread are you" quizzes on Facebook? Or dive into yet another personality assessment? There's just something irresistible about seeing ourselves reflected back to us, even if it's through the lens of breakfast pastries. I'll be the first to admit, I'm a recovering personality test junkie. From Myers-Briggs to human design, I've done them all. And for years, I approached these tools like collecting merit badges, gathering more and more labels to define myself. Until one day, I realized that I was doing the exact opposite of what I truly wanted, which was to strip away the layers and find my essential truth. So if you've been following my journey, you've probably heard me talk about moving away from some of these external frameworks. I've been on the path of removing labels, peeling back societal conditioning, questioning everything I thought I knew about myself. It felt like the more I could let go of these definitions, the closer I could get to my authentic core. But something interesting happened recently that completely shifted my perspective on personality frameworks. I realized that these tools don't have to be about adding more layers. They can actually help us identify the very patterns that we're trying to transcend. So think about it like this. Imagine you're trying to untangle a complex knot. You could just pull at random strings hoping to make progress. Or you could study the pattern of the knot first, understanding exactly how it's twisted and turned, making the untangling process much more intentional and effective. Well, that's what these frameworks can do when we use them wisely. So instead of using them to build our identity, we can use them to understand our attachments and our default patterns and the stories we've been telling ourselves and our core motivations. So they become mirrors showing us where we might be stuck or where we tend to grasp too tightly, where we might need to pay extra attention in our personal growth work, what will actually help us move forward. This revelation hit me particularly hard when I was diving deep into the Enneagram system. So unlike other personality frameworks that I've come across, this one seems a little less interested in putting me in a box and more focused on showing me the box I've already put myself in. And more importantly, how to think outside of it. So today, our guest is Stephanie Barron Hall. She's an Enneagram expert who brings a fresh perspective on how to actually use this in our real life. So she's written Enneagram in Real Life, fitting, right? And she specializes in helping people use the Enneagram as a practical tool for growth instead of just another label to collect. So in this episode, you'll learn why your childhood experiences might be secretly driving your adult decisions and how to change that. The surprising reason why you and someone else can experience the exact same event completely differently, and how understanding your core motivations can free you from repeating the same patterns over and over. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up or text the word morning to 33777.
Recognize like, oh, I'm doing that thing. Or, oh, I think I'm doing this for this reason. And the whole idea is to allow a pause so that you don't always go for your automatic reaction, but you allow that pause to then have another reaction come up or to choose something different. Because a lot of the time, the things that we always do are because we've needed them. They're, our survival strategies. But once we're adults, we get to choose something different. And so I think the most helpful thing is to be like, oh, I am turning up the radio right now. Why am I doing that? Oh, I'm having a feeling that I don't want to listen to. Let's just be with that feeling for a moment and see what that's like.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
What intrigued you enough about Enneagram to make it your life path?
Well, I have always been fascinated by personality typings and things. Even when I was a kid, I was obsessed with these sorts of things. And so that led me to discovering when I was actually studying psychology in my undergrad, this thing of using personality assessments and things like that with team bonding and team development. And I was actually able to do that in one of my first jobs out of college. And so when I found the Enneagram, which my husband and my older sister both were like, you would love this. And I was like, at first I brushed it off. But eventually I said, okay, fine. I'll take it. And I fell in love with it because it was motivation based. And I think that's really unique. And we can get more into what that means. But I was so interested in this tool that was not about where I was at the moment, but kind of about where I'd been and where I'm going and like what the growth trajectory is for my life.
You have been through some kind of burnout and overcommitment moments. How has that shaped the way you approach the Enneagram as a tool for growth?
Yeah. So part of it is my type. So my type 3, is one of the ones that's like infamous for burning themselves out. And one thing I love about the Enneagram is that we've got these different resources that we can use that are different numbers. We don't have to know the Enneagram to use these resources. The Enneagram is just a map that says, here's a way to deal with burnout if you are the type that always burns yourself out. And so there are two different things. One is that I've learned how to access different kind of methods. And I write about that a lot in the book of like learning how to, for example, use that part of myself that wants to plan everything out and instead plan time, like downtime for myself, which I really struggle with doing. Or to use a different aspect of myself that I could say, okay, let's actually think through this. Like, is this practical for right now? I know you want to say yes, but what if you could say no? Like, can you actually do that? And to decide, yeah, I actually can say no, and that's going to be okay. I think those are really important. The other thing I'll mention is that I noticed myself kind of going all in on inner work and growth stuff too, and just putting so much into that. And I was like, I just need to chill out and like just let myself be and not be so hell-bent on like changing every little thing about myself or like having all this growth and development. And I write about that a little bit as well too, but to just relax and to let something sink in and to not, go to every retreat or get every certification, but just relax a little bit into that.
I was just talking about that on a recent episode. I call it my transformation addiction phase. And I would read something and then be like, okay, well, I was seeing all books and podcasts and everything as like these universal truths. And so I was crafting a morning routine and I remember just being like, I can't do this. I can't do my 20-minute meditation, get movement, do breath work. What else was I trying to do? My morning pages. And I was just like, I'm living for this morning routine that's supposed to help me feel clear, but it's taking up my life. Like, what am I doing? And so I had to dial it back and actually tune into myself and say, well, first I dropped everything. And then I was like, well, that doesn't feel good either. And so it was like this process. And it's one thing that I've helped people discover of like, what is the one thing that you find makes everything else either easier or unnecessary. And for me, it's meditation. For one of my friends, it's breath work. And so we don't always have to fit into this mold of, if you talk to my friend, she says, no, breath work is the one thing that changes everything for me. And so that was why I was holding it to such value, because I'm like, well, I really like what she's done with her life. But for me, I love breath work if I want a sudden shift of energy, but it's not the thing that it doesn't even necessarily feel like my thing. Meditation now does. Yoga now does. But even that, after 17 years of doing yoga, I've changed my relationship with it a bit. I used to have to do it at least like 5 times a week. Now it's like I do a 15-minute little thing pretty much every day, and I try to have one long session a week. I've got toddlers. And so everything's this constant flow. But knowing myself well, to the Enneagram's point, knowing what motivates me, and then also with my self-work, knowing what just feels good, not what feels obligatory or what feels like everybody else is saying is the next big thing.
Right.
That helps guide all of my decisions.
Right. And I think that's such a good point as well that you bring up, having toddlers, you're in a season of life where like it's not really realistic to do all like this hour-long morning routine every single day before your kids are up. And I'm sure that some people out there, they're like, I make it work because I have to do that. And if that's what gives you life, that's great. I'm not saying that it's wrong. What I'm saying is looking at what you need to do in the context of your exact life right now. So what worked for you 5 years ago might not work right now, and that's fine. And so throughout the book that I wrote, I wanted to make things really practical. And so for each type, there are several different types of like ideas or journal prompts or different kind of practices for people to use, because it's not expected that anyone is going to do everything. But I just want to give people lots of different ideas and lots of different angles to think about things. And some of them are like, just think about this for a moment. And I like ones like that because you do need to have some basic sense of psychological safety, of course, to be able to do that. But also, you don't have to set aside 30 minutes. It can just be kind of a question that you're kind of thinking about.
One problem, or I guess problem I've had with different personality type things. So a lot of times people are like, well, this won't change for you over time. But I've never found that to be, I rarely find that to be realistic because I am a rapid grower. I'm always changing. Mm-hmm. So there are tests that I've done when I was younger that now I do it again, and I'm just not that type of person anymore. And so it was interesting because for me, I was preparing for this interview and I was like, let me go back to my Enneagram because I've done a few episodes on it before. And I was reading over the types. I got 7, 3, 9, and they still feel very real to me, which is awesome. 5 years later, 4 years later. But I'm curious because I'm the type of person, because I'm kind of a rapid mover, I'm like, oh, this is really cool. And I start to filter things through while I'm learning about it. And then I kind of move on to the next thing. What keeps you coming back to Enneagram? How is it helpful to actually have it as a thread through your life rather than just sort of touching on it every few years?
Mm-hmm. I find the best analogy for it is as a map, right? So with part of the Enneagram theory is that your type doesn't change, but we do change as people. Like we do develop different coping skills and we learn to soften different parts of ourselves because that's what we've needed. But it really is very dynamic. So within each type, there are 3 distinct subtypes. And looking down at that level is really where a lot of the growth work can happen because you get really specific kind of advice, like a very specific path on how to move forward. And that's the part that I think is really helpful and really interesting about the Enneagram is it's not just like, this is who you are or where you are, but it's like, this is how you move to that next phase that you want to go to. Or this is how you can understand when you're in a really unhealthy or stressed or exhausted spot. This is how you can understand what's going on when you're in that state. And so that's why I really like it. But I definitely get disillusioned with it at times where I'm like, can everything be explained by this? And of course, we are layered, complex humans. Like we have a lot of different facets of ourselves that come into play. But because I have the privilege of teaching this tool in corporate spaces, I constantly get the feedback because I actually work with a lot of HR departments. And they'll be like, I've done every single one of these assessments. And then they take the Enneagram and they're like, this is the first time that I'm like, oh yeah, this gets me. Or I'll do a teaching and people have these huge light bulb moments where they're like, oh, I knew I did that, but I didn't understand why I was doing that. And so that's what I really like about it. Certainly there are people that, just go through phases, and that's totally fine too. But for me, I think that there's like this deeper level of it, and constantly reimagining how it applies in my life that I think is really helpful.
So what's the best way to find your Enneagram type? Is it a quiz? Is it a reflection?
Yeah, great question. This is probably the trickiest part of the Enneagram, because finding your type can be quite difficult. So I always recommend that people take a quiz. There's one in my book. There is going to be people can also grab my self-typing guide, where they'll find instructions. But basically, it's looking at all of the types and looking at maybe your top three. So like for you, for example, you narrowed down to 3, 7, and 9. So looking at your top three and then reading more detail on those top three. Maybe listening to podcast interviews with people of each of those types or panels. There are lots of great panels on YouTube. Why that's important is because I obviously love books. I love reading. I really like that. But there's something that you get in the quality of, you understand more about the quality of the type, the energy that they put out, those sort of ineffable qualities that we can't really put on paper. You're going to get more of that in a panel or in an interview. And, sometimes I'll meet somebody who's like, I'm definitely a 9. And then they go and all of the 9s on the panel are very even keeled, very easygoing. And they're like, whoa, there's not that much energy coming off of them. And I feel really energetic. And then they think, oh, maybe I'm actually a 7, so that can kind of be one of the ways that plays out. So it's a multi-step process. Again, quiz, read up on your top 3 types, typically. And I really encourage people to read resources that include the subtypes, because that's how most people mistype as well. And then watch some podcasts or panels on YouTube that will kind of flesh those things out.
You know what's crazy? After all these years of hosting Mind Love and talking to some of the world's leading experts, one of the biggest eye-openers for me has been just how much our gut affects, well, everything. When my gut feels good, my mind feels clear, my intuition is stronger, and I just feel more balanced. And that's why I'm excited about Zoe, a science-backed nutrition company that is totally changing how we understand our gut health. They've created the most scientifically advanced at-home gut test and built the world's largest microbiome database. So when you get your results, you're not getting generic advice. You're getting insights about your body that other companies just don't have the data to provide. There's also just so much misleading health information out there. Food companies even pay influencers to promote ultra-processed foods as healthy. And that's why I love that Zoe relies purely on science. Real science. The randomized controlled trial showed that participants were 4 times as likely to report better sleep and more energy, all thanks to the info from the largest microbiome database on the planet. So go to Zoe.com and find out what Zoe membership could do for you. And because you listen to Mind Love, you can use the exclusive code MINDLOVE10 to get 10% off membership. As a Zoe member, you'll get an at-home test kit and personalized nutrition program to help you make smarter food choices that support your gut. That's Zoe.com. Use MindLove10 at checkout. Trust your gut. Trust Zoe.
This episode is brought to you by Heyday. Looking to escape all the festive chaos? Turn holiday hecticness into harmony with Heyday, the mobile game that helps you harvest calm, one crop at a time. Reclaim your me time. Relax, decorate, and enjoy farming bliss as you tend to your animals and harvest crops as part of a welcoming, stress-free community. Join over 20 million players. Just tap or click on the banner now to download Heyday for free today.
I found it interesting. So my top type is a 7. And you said that it's motivation based. And so when I'm on your website and it talks about a 7, it says that my common underlying motivation is to be free to explore possibilities without limitation. And I'm consistently avoiding being trapped in pain or boredom. And this brings together So many other things I know about myself. For example, values exercise. My number one value I always come back to is freedom. And I realized that I need that. And I have to really think about like, okay, if I'm going to go into this area of my work, what kind of schedule is that going to trap me into? What kind of expectations will that trap me into? And so freedom has rang true since childhood that I can remember. I don't like when people tell me what to do. Like I can be that defiant kid. But then also ADHD. So one of the ways that I have to mitigate my ADHD, and it's been a constant evolving process, is realizing that I need novelty. And so hearing that I'm avoiding being trapped in pain or boredom, it also rings true because I used to be like my morning routine needs to be this set thing. And then I would get over it, wouldn't work anymore. And I started to develop a belief that I wasn't the type of person that could be consistent until I realized I needed to work with my ADHD and apparently also my Enneagram of like, okay, no, when it starts to feel stale, what can I do to freshen it up? And so now my morning routine has a structure of the things that I know make me feel good: stillness, movement, reflection. But what type of activity that fits into that category might switch up at different times. And I'm okay with that. I don't create meaning around or negative meaning around what that means about me anymore. So that's why when I was like, oh, yep, these are very true and even more true than I thought of them when I first found them, because I have all these other explorations that seem to fit right in that, that number 7.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's really interesting too, because of course, not every 7 has ADHD and not every person with ADHD is a type 7, but you do see a lot of those overlaps. Something that a lot of 7s have in common is that they really like to understand the model of how things work. Like if somebody says this is how it is, they're like, but why is that? Like, I need to understand all the different mechanisms at play. They go to therapy and they're like, I want to understand the modality you're using. Like what is happening here? And 7s are always working on some puzzle in their minds. Now, other types with ADHD will do that. So I have ADHD as well. I resonate most with type 3. So that is going on a little bit in my mind, but that's not the central focus because I have this entire different motivation that is about kind of managing the image that other people have of me and all of these sorts of things. And so yes, it's super interesting to see how those things line up. And that can be a really helpful way to find your type as well, of like, what is the feedback you've gotten throughout your life? A lot of 1s, for example, will say, I've always been told that I'm way too hard on myself or that I'm too much of a perfectionist. So we all get this feedback and then we see the Enneagram and we're like, oh, okay, yeah, I see that.
Tell us about your type, the type 3.
Sure. And if you'd like, I can go through all 9 as well. But type 3 is motivated by the need to be successful. And successful is very like kind of changeable depending on the person. But it's really about being successful, admirable, and impressive to other people. From an early age, 3s thought, if people are impressed by me, if I perform well, that's how I get love, and that's how I get affection and attention. And so they really quiet down their internal, cues and all those sorts of things, and decide I'm going to be this person who will perform well in this room, who can shapeshift to be whatever I need to be, and I'm going to show up as that person. And I believe that I am that person. And their kind of worst case scenario, or the thing they're constantly avoiding, is being a failure or falling short of their potential. And so they worry a lot about, no, I wouldn't even say all 3s categorize it as worry, but they consider a lot. How do other people think of me? And how can I make sure that they think well of me? And so they're kind of always managing that aspect of themselves. It's like a lot of their image. Now, image isn't necessarily always about looking a certain way, but it can be how other people perceive you. That's the image, right? And so sometimes that means, well, I want to be in with this crowd. I'm from, for example, I had a client who was from the rural Midwest, and really identified with like, I'm just a down home boy. Like, you know, this is my image. So they're like, I don't like fancy cars. But they still were a 3. And so that image management piece was still coming across. So for 3s, the work is really, for 7s, the work is to build that structure for yourself and to find ways to support yourself and also find ways that you can thrive within limitations. And kind of build that for yourself and learn to say no to all the amazing activities and ideas that you have. And for 3s, the growth work is really about tuning into your emotional side and recognizing, who am I? And asking that question and understanding, what are my values? What do I really want in life? What do I say yes to? Not because I want to, but because I believe that's what other people want from me. And so getting to know yourself and going more in your own authentic way.
I do want to go over all of them, but beforehand, I want to know how the subtypes play in, because is it like astrology where it's like, well, this is how you present yourself and this is how your inner world is or whatever.
Yeah. So it kind of feels a little similar in some ways. So let's talk about type 7, for example. So we have the overarching motivation, and 7s have this passion of gluttony. So they like to explore and sample and try out everything they possibly can. And the subtypes are actually 3 survival instincts that interact with gluttony in different ways. So the 3 survival instincts that are the same for each type are self-preservation, which is I'm responsible for my own survival. They focus a lot on risk management, security, health, things like that. Social, which they think if the herd survives, I survive. So they think about belonging, who has the power. They think about the social good and what, the collective good. And then sexual, or sometimes I call it spark when I teach in corporate, which is about having a really chemistry-laden one-to-one connection, bonding, merging with somebody else. But it can also be very much about adrenaline, and kind of having that impetus to go out and do something big. So sexual subtypes tend to be more about a deep connection with one other person, but it also is kind of about that chemistry and getting like a spark in life. So the self-preservation 7, they think, I can work any deal and I'm okay with delaying gratification some so that I can have more resources later. So a lot of the time they will save up all of their financial resources, for example, and they'll be very frugal, or they'll figure out all these ways to work the system so that they don't have to spend any money, but they can amass some and they still get a lot of fun and excitement and enjoyment out of daily life. There can be a bit of hedonism as well, that streak too, because they're like, what's here and now is all that there is. They tend to be more pragmatic of the 7s. But they're also kind of okay with like working really hard. And sometimes they mistype as 3s because sometimes there's a stereotype of 7s not finishing anything. And that's really not true of self-preservation 7s.
This is funny because I'm also a Taurus, and Taurus has a really big love for material things. And I've got this 7. And then you're talking about this sort of resourcefulness. I cannot relate to the saving up everything and then splurging. I can't do that because it is like the here and now. However, everyone throughout my whole life has called me resourceful because I will find a way to get what I want. I end up getting free things somehow, like playing the system. Even with my podcast, there's been certain times where I'm like, oh, cool, I love this sponsor, because they'll send me stuff. And in the beginning, I was more excited to get the free thing than what they were paying me to sponsor the podcast. Like, with the money, I could have just bought this and then some, but for some reason, I'm so excited about the freebie.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just funny how every single typing I've ever done seems to fit so well into this one umbrella.
Yeah. So the social 7, they kind of go the opposite way. They're like afraid of being selfish. Deep down, they believe, what if I am a little selfish? So um, they're terrified of that, which other sevens are like, it's okay to be a little selfish sometimes. But social sevens think, no, that's not okay. So they really serve the common good and they work so hard to alleviate pain from their close loved ones or the people they work with. There are a lot of social sevens in helping professions. A lot of them that I know are coaches or nurses or therapists because they really like helping people not experience pain anymore. And so, in that way, social sevens can kind of put themselves last sometimes. Like one example that I've heard is where at the end of a party, things are winding down. They're like, oh, I'm going to go refill champagne for everyone because that'll keep the party going. And it's very sacrificial. Like it's a nice thing to do to make sure everyone else has champagne. Um, so that's a way that they kind of navigate that. And yeah, so social sevens often seem more like twos if you take an Enneagram assessment that doesn't have the subtypes in it, because they want to serve other people, but deep down they are the seven motivation of being wanting freedom. And so it's like in a way, by serving other people, they kind of get their own freedom because people won't then notice when they have to meet their own needs. And deep down, all sevens kind of believe like I have to meet my own needs. And then sexual sevens are the like whimsical. They're the most, rose-colored glasses. Like there's joy or excitement or intrigue behind every corner. And so they're the type of people that are like, yes, let's just go explore. Let's just go see what's out there. And they tend to be, they kind of give off this vibe of being like flighty, but they can still be very serious about their job and their people, their close relationships. But they are always saying something zany or doing something interesting. And they tend to be a little bit more into woo-woo type stuff than the other two subtypes. And they like mystical things and interested in like the supernatural. And for all sevens, this is true, but especially for sexual sevens, things just work out for them. Like because they believe that everything is possible, they don't waste time thinking about what if it doesn't happen. They're like, well, it's going to happen, you know? And then if things don't work out, they can really quickly just reframe and do something different.
I resonate with that one also.
Mm-hmm.
One more thought on the gluttony thing. I find it interesting that I struggled with bulimia for a long time as well. Mm-hmm. And so definitely the 7 in there. When you say subtype, does that mean that that is not your overarching, or does that mean every single number that you're picking is one of the subtypes as it is? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it means it's kind of like I'm a 7 and then my subtype is self-preservation 7.
Gotcha.
And then we all have all 3 of them within us. But there's one that's typically very dominant, and that's the one that we call the subtype. And then there's one that's secondary, and then one that's repressed. So, yeah, I mean, different people kind of see that differently, but the way that I see it is your subtype is kind of what you see in action on a day-to-day basis. So you probably will resonate with all the subtypes of your type, but the one that you see in practice and your behavior, that's the one that is really going to stand out.
I find it interesting that one of the ones that I resonated with was the sexual 7, but the description didn't really seem sexual.
Yeah. So it's because it's really like they have that desire. So I didn't mention as much of that part. So sexual 7s like have this desire for an ideal love connection. And they're really good at the start of a relationship. But the sexual 7 drive is for this idealism. And it doesn't make them that great at staying in a relationship because the second they start to feel kind of trapped or tied down or stifled, they're like, oh no, like this isn't right. This isn't the ideal. And they have to go explore and find something different. And so that's part of the reason that they're always driven to go out and explore and gather more information and gather more experiences And part of their growth work is recognizing that the ideal that's in front of them is good, and that we all have imperfections in our relationships. But that doesn't mean that they can't be something powerful or fulfilling.
It's interesting looking back on things in hindsight. Like you were talking about sevens really needing to know the model behind something. And just yesterday, my friend and I have this like friendly back and forth going. I won't even say what it is because it's kind of this controversial thing that'll make me look crazy. Whether or not viruses exist. There's a whole school of people that are like, look, actually, did you know there's like 90 studies they've done trying to prove the existence of viruses and they've all failed. And I'm always interested in like, what's the truth behind this? Are we being lied to? So it's something I'm just still playing with. I don't know. But we go back and forth and she's just like, why does it even matter if the same thing happens, if things spread via resonance versus a virus? And I was like, because I just need to understand why. Like, even if it changes nothing about how I approach this, I need to understand the model behind it because it might affect something else in my worldview. And then you said this. And so I was like, this makes sense. I need to go back to her and be like, what? Do you know your Enneagram?
Yeah, right. And so a few types, and I'm thinking about 6 and 7 in particular, are very different, but they have this thing in common where they love to have these mental debates. So I have a 6 and a 7 in my close family, and they will get in these like mental, like just debates. And it's just like going over and over in their minds. And there's all this different stuff. And they're like kind of laughing and they're having fun. And everyone else is like, oh my gosh, please stop arguing. They're enjoying it because they like that intrigue and that understanding and like breaking things down and understanding the model and analyzing and all that stuff. And so, yeah, I think that's a really commonly overlooked thing about sevens. Like people are like, oh, they just like to have fun. It's like, well, okay, sure. They like to have fun, but there's this other mechanism beneath the surface that is really propelling that quote, fun loving activity.
Yeah. And it makes sense. That's where I feel least understood is when I try to have these deep debates that don't necessarily mean anything. Another fun one is I'm like, what if aliens aren't physical beings, but they come from another dimension, not another planet? And people are like, you can't prove this. Why are we talking about it? And I can see people getting stressed out. And I'm like, why do you not have fun just exploring ideas, whether or not viruses exist? Like, why are you mad at me about this? Does it really affect you? Like, I'm just playing with an idea. What if it's true? What else exists out there? What studies have they done? And yeah, I rarely meet someone who wants to go down those rabbit holes with me. And I often meet people who, like I said, have like an emotion around it. They're like angry that I'm like shaking their potential worldview or that I'm questioning something that somehow shouldn't be questioned. But I'd love to know a little more briefly about each of the types because we've gone into pretty good detail about 7s and 3s. Sure. Let's start at 1.
Okay. So type 1s are motivated by a need to be good, right, and correct. And that does not mean to be good at things. They want to be a good, moral, ethical person according to their ethics. It's not necessarily about what I think or what you think or, what some religion thinks. It's about what their ethical code is. And they want to avoid being wrong and being the last to know when they're wrong. That's especially terrifying. So their inner critic is always in there saying, well, are you sure you're right about that? Like, kind of correcting and berating them. But they also want to avoid being bad or corrupt. And so they set these really strict boundaries to make sure that they stay on the straight and narrow and they won't be bad or corrupt in any way.
I feel like immediately 3 people came to mind that I want to like text them. What's your Enneagram? Is it a 1?
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of us have these perfectionistic tendencies, but 1s can have a really hard time because they're very black and white. Yeah. So then
the thing about good girl syndrome, where people are like, yeah, and all these women in the room will like pop up, yes, good girl syndrome, and I've just never resonated. I'm like, what do you mean? I've always been fine being the little rebel in the back as long as I got more freedom or something about the model didn't seem right.
Yeah. So, and 2s are actually similar. So 2s, in the sense of like the good girl syndrome concept, Twos are motivated by this need to be loved and wanted and needed. And really, what they're after is positive relational rapport with other people. They want affection and encouragement. They're very conscientious, and they think about, how can I kind of make everyone else feel good so that they will like me and that they will want me to be around. They can, I always want to reiterate that twos have lots of different skills and they can be great at lots of different things. They're not only good for like relationships. They're not all, therapists or something. But they look at things through the lens of relationships. So they can be very strategic in making those connections. And they want to avoid being discarded or rejected. And so sometimes even their advice or their encouragement, and often unsolicited advice, sorry, twos, when that feels rejected, they feel personally rejected. And so that can be really tough. And they just want everyone to feel good and to get along. And secretly, they really just want that to be reflected back to them as well.
I'm wondering if my mom is a two. It sounds to me, the way you described it, though, that these people, like, they really want to be needed, but you said the unsolicited advice. And I feel like that's often the thing that tends to disconnect relationships more. Yeah. So are they getting in their own way a lot?
Yeah, they do in that sense. I mean, depending on the person, I have a really hard time with that. But other people, I think, are like, well, they mean well, and they're okay with it. But I think for twos, they really don't ever want to seem like they're the one who needs help. And so that can be a challenge as well. Yeah, they really put themselves last, unfortunately.
We've gone over threes. Do we need to know anything else that we didn't touch on with them?
No, I think we can jump straight to 4.
Okay.
So 4s are motivated by this need to find their true identity and express their truest self. So they're really searching, plumbing the depths of their psyche. Like, what is there to know about me? And they're not introspective in the sense of like, I don't know anything about myself and I need to. They're introspective in the sense of like, there's so much more to uncover and to know. So they're very emotional. They're very in tune with their own emotions. They typically are really good at describing exactly how they're feeling about things. And even if they don't express it directly, they kind of marinate in it a little bit. They have this just very imaginative, rich inner landscape. And then they are avoiding being inauthentic or insignificant. They really want to be their truest self. And they really want to put their own little special spin on things. So their project, they put their own little spin on it and make it their own. They don't want to blend in or be a cookie cutter in any sense. And sometimes they love being different and sometimes they hate being different. And that's just part of their kind of process.
Do you tend to make your relationship partners do the Enneagram test so you know how to relate to them better?
Well, it's funny because so I've been with my husband for 14 years. So I learned the Enneagram throughout this time, and he has had a heck of a time figuring out his type. And it was something that for me, for my own growth work, I was like, I need to step back and let him have his own process. And so he finally figured it out, like for sure, a year and a half ago. And it has really resonated and it has really helped because I suddenly realized some things that I'd been interpreting as him saying, oh, you can't do that, was just him having his own fears about things. And that's okay for him to have his fears. I mean, we can have a conversation about him projecting them onto me, but like he's allowed to have them, and instead of taking it so personally, we were able to kind of depersonalize that some. And so that's so helpful.
I mentioned how when you were talking about Enneagram 1, a few people came to mind, and I could see how having this information previously could have been really helpful because, for example, during all the lockdowns and all the crazy things, there were quite a few different worldviews happening. And me and one of my close friends, I was just like, I need to find the truth of what's going on. Why are we being told this and then being told that? And what about this? And so I'm like, everything that's coming up, I'm scanning it across my entire worldview, what I know to be true about certain things. And And she was like, good girl, like, no, we're being told to do this. So this is what we need to do. Yes, we're being told to do something different now, but that's because they must have found new information and we need to fall in line and be good moral people. And so we really, really clashed during this time. And it was just for a period. We're good friends again. But I can see how even just seeing that now, I'm like, oh, that's her core motivation. And oh, this is my core motivation. It's not judging each other on the way that we're dealing with this. Personally, I think it's one of the things I teach the most is we need different perspectives. We need the entire spectrum. Even if somebody's on the far end of view and you have no idea, just thank them for being the one that's holding that point of view so we can create balance in the world. But anyways, sometimes it's hard to find that balance because we're taking things personally. We're wondering if their point of view is creating meaning around us. But instead, if we're just looking at it as the way that they move through the world, what their core motivation, it can really help with acceptance from people who are handling things in a very different way than you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really useful, especially with teams and in relationships, to be able to dissect that a little bit and understand, okay, let's just have some compassion and some empathy for how different people perceive the world, and figure out a different way to work together based on that. So fives are our next type. Fives are motivated by this need to be competent and self-sufficient. And in order to do so, they really decrease what they need from the world. So they can almost like border on ascetic type people where they're like, I just don't need much, or anything that they do need, they can meet it with their own resources, because their worst fear is being depleted, and their energy, time, financial, emotional resources being depleted. So when that happens, they have to withdraw, and they feel very intruded upon by others who are kind of like trying to help or reach out, because they really need that alone time to really recharge. They love to be in facts and data, and they don't really like the emotional side of life too much. They can deal with it, but they tend to do that on their own, in their own minds. So very cerebral and introspective type as well.
The #1 selling product of its kind with over 20 years of research and innovation. Botox Cosmetic, onabotulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
When you share your food, you share your heart. So what's on your table this holiday season? Save on your festive feast at Kroger with delicious deals on all the holiday classics. Or wow the crowd with something new, like a quinoa stuffed butternut squash. It's sure to add a pop of color to your spread. How about a sweet potato casserole with a crunchy oat streusel topping, made with care for the sweet tooth and the savory tooth? With Kroger, fill your table with love and watch as your guests' hearts get as full as their bellies. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
I'm thinking of, I wonder if my father-in-law is just very holding on to the things that he has. But it's interesting too, how oftentimes when I understand somebody's type of something, but then I look at their life, it's like you can also see how their life creates those circumstances. So it's like this holistic thing of like, what came first, your Enneagram or your experience? Or did the universe know your type and they created situations for you to step more fully into this motivation? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it's definitely both, right? Like, a 7 would perceive the same event differently from a 2. in early childhood. So I think that we do different things with our different lenses. And they kind of form into part of our story. So now we have sixes, and sixes are motivated by this need to be safe and secure and to find certainty. So that's like the most important thing for them. They really want to feel certain about something, but certainty is elusive because the closer you get, the more there is that's unknowable and uncertain. And so sixes do everything they can to mitigate fear, which is kind of this dominant experience that they have overall. So they either move away from it or they move toward it. So some sixes will plan. And, I had a six in a session one time say that the way that she got to sleep every night was planning out the worst case scenarios for everything that could happen and how she would deal with them. Okay. Some sixes will do things like that. Other sixes will say, I'm not going to let the fear stop me. I'm afraid of heights, so I'm going to jump out of an airplane, go skydiving. And so they look fear in the face and try to kind of scare it off, but it still can be an underlying force. So the first type of sixes, they tend to not trust themselves, and they're kind of looking externally for people or ideologies to trust, though they don't really trust that either. They're very suspicious. The latter type of six, which we call the counterphobic six, they are more likely to trust themselves, but they don't necessarily trust anyone else. And trust is very hard for sixes. But they want to because they're very loyal, they're deeply loyal people, and they want good relationships. That's really important to them. So their worst fear is the worst case scenario happening, and that they could have seen coming, but they didn't.
That sounds like my nightmare. I don't think I resonate with being a six. I'm
They're
like,
very opposite to sevens.
worst case scenario, let's just go back to the best possibility.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting as we go around the circle, every type is kind of in some way the opposite of the neighboring type.
So we've extensively covered 7. Let's go to 8.
So 8s are a very different type from 7 in that they are very grounded people, in the sense of you just get a sense from them that you can't knock them over. you know, 7s will run away and they'll escape, and they've got that lightness. And 8s are very much more grounded, and they're motivated by a need to be against. And it's not against just to be contrarian for contrarian's sake, but it kind of is this thought process like there is something here that's not being said, and I need to find the truth. And also, I need to have a tough exterior so that people will know that they can't overtake me or try to control me. So they're really motivated to protect themselves. And they feel like if, their worst case scenario is being betrayed or controlled by somebody else. And they believe that the way that that happens is by being too vulnerable. So that's really what their entire thing is about. But 8s are very dynamic. They are sometimes very brash people. But that could be in a good way or a bad way, just like all of us. They're very concrete. They don't really deal in abstractions too much. And they're protective not only of themselves, but of their closest people as well. And a lot of the time, 8s will protect the marginalized as well.
I resonate with a lot of that, but for slightly different core motivations, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Those who know me probably were seeing me in that, just the being again, why are we being told to do this? Is this real? Who's profiting off of this? Like the amount of areas of my life that comes back to that where I need to know the truth, like the finding of the truth. But
yeah, so 7s are rebellious too, but they tend to go about it a little bit of a different way. And 8s have a lot more anger behind it. But both 7s and 8s are really quick to move toward action, which is something that they share.
Okay, now 9.
9s are motivated by this need to be at peace internally and externally. And that means that they really create this quiet, calm, comfortable space for themselves keeping the outside world out and the inside world in, where they can just be cozy and kind of feel at peace. And their worst case scenario is being the cause of discord or disconnection. And so what ends up happening is that they kind of merge with other people around them, thinking, if I just say, I'm easygoing, or I'll go along with that, that they won't have conflict, because they really fear their relationships kind of falling apart. So sometimes they end up being a little passive aggressive because they say they tacitly agree to things that they don't actually want to do. And then they don't do it because nines have an independent streak. So they don't want to be told what to do. But they want to keep the peace. And so sometimes they'll just kind of do their own thing anyway. But they deeply care about their relationships and getting along with people. And because of that thing that I mentioned, where they're kind of keeping the outside and the inside world at bay, to avoid any clash, that takes a lot of energy. So sometimes they can show up with a little bit less energy than the other types. They just seem to have less energy, even though it's just being used differently.
So once someone has a deep understanding of their Enneagram, how do they use it in their real life? How do you think about it from a day-to-day perspective? Is it something that you start your day sort of filtering things through, or is it what you come to when something's coming up, a new project, or is it kind of all of the above?
Yeah, kind of all of the above. The best thing to do, I think, is to start with self-reflection and then self-observation, to recognize, like, oh, I'm doing that thing. Or, oh, I think I'm doing this for this reason. And the whole idea is to allow a pause so that you don't always go for your automatic reaction, but you allow that pause to then have another reaction come up. Or to choose something different. Because a lot of the time, the things that we always do are because we've needed them. They're, our survival strategies. But, once we're adults, we get to choose something different. And so I think the most helpful thing is to be like, oh, I am turning up the radio right now. Why am I doing that? Oh, I'm having a feeling that I don't want to listen to. Let's just be with that feeling for a moment and see what that's like. Just as an example of how we could go about that.
And so say I am resisting something in work, and then I'm like, wait, this is coming back to me having a core motivation of freedom. Do I pause and say, okay, can I deal with this differently? Or do I pause and say, that core motivation of freedom is going to keep coming back, so maybe I should restructure this business situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at if the core motivation is actually serving you anymore, right? Like if, like for example, I knew a 7 who kept saying yes to all these different ventures and just like kind of expanding their business to incorporate them all. But then would get overwhelmed and wouldn't be able to follow through on anything. So they'd be like, oh, let's just rescope and make everything a little smaller. But there were still just as many irons in the fire, just that they were like slightly smaller. And they were running themselves into the ground with that. So recognizing, okay, these are all good ideas, but I have to choose. And that feels very limiting and very difficult. But recognizing, like, there is freedom in narrowing to 2 things versus doing 5, because you have more freedom to advance in those 2 areas rather than doing 5 areas, as an example.
What is something that you come back to when it comes to your Enneagram that might not be so obvious?
I think the thing that I keep coming back to is how much my family of origin plays into how my Enneagram type perceives things. So, like I mentioned earlier, success depends on the person, and really unpacking, like, oh, this is what my family of origin perceived as successful. But what if I want to have a different perspective on what success means? So let me recalibrate that based on my values and what I think now versus what I was always taught. So really changing that. And I think that with 3 in particular, it's not always seen that way.
I love asking people for one practice or action item or thought to kind of ground what we've been talking about into reality. And so the obvious one would be to get your Enneagram type. So I want to go beyond that. Say they have their Enneagram type. What's one thing to leave them with that sort of makes what we've been talking about real or useful?
Yeah. So at the end of every day, do a daily check-in. So I have this on my phone. It goes off at 8 p.m. every night. And it's just a reminder that says daily check-in. And I have questions like, how did I see my type show up today? What did that look like? What did these specific facets of the type look like? For example, 3s do a lot of people pleasing and perfectionism. How did I see those show up today? And what could I have done differently? And what would the person that I want to be have done in that instance? So really, honing in on those, a couple things in your type that you want to work on, and ask yourself, what would have gone differently? It's just a simple self-reflection, but it's really easy, I think, and it takes less than 5 minutes. And it just gets you in the habit so that the next time you're about to do the thing, for me, people pleasing, the next time I'm about to do that, I'm like, oh, yeah, there I go. Let's choose something different.
So for listeners who are interested in working with you or finding your book, where's the best place to connect?
Yeah, you can find me at my website, which is 9types, all spelled out, .co. You can find me on Instagram at 9typesco, again, all spelled out. And then you can find my podcast, which is Enneagram in Real Life. And that's the same name as the book, Enneagram in Real Life, wherever books are sold.
All the links from this episode will be at mindlove.com/381. Your challenge for this week is to do a daily check-in with yourself. So set a reminder on your phone for the same day each time, maybe 8 p.m., and reflect on how your core motivations showed up in your day, in your choices and your reactions. And don't judge what you discover. Just observe it with curiosity. Notice if your automatic responses are actually serving you, or if they're just old patterns that you've outgrown. So give it a try. Let me know how it goes. You can always reach me at mindlovemelissa on Instagram. And if you're thinking, great, another framework to filter my life through, I want you to pause for a moment because I have something for you. Here's the thing. Exploration should feel natural. It should flow with your own evolution, not against it. I have these little challenges so we feel like we're doing something each week, but sometimes they can feel overwhelming. You're like, Melissa, we have almost 500 challenges at this point. Well, they're not meant to go forever. They're meant to help you notice which areas feel helpful, which little activities feel like they move the needle, which ones were just a little game to play with yourself for a week. But I want to tell you about something that I'm really excited about and have been pouring my heart into. It's called Living Mind Love. So it's not just another program, it's a framework that works with your natural rhythm of growth. So month by month, we focus on a different area of your life, building momentum in a way that feels just really easy and aligned. So no pressure, just steady, meaningful progress. So every month focuses on a different foundation, something that's key to giving yourself the space to find out the truth of who you are, what your motivations are, how to work with the natural laws of the universe so that it doesn't feel like you're pushing a boulder uphill, but you're finally flowing with the way you and the universe work together. So right now, I'm offering this at a special Founders Members price. You also get access to the first Mind Love community. And this is honestly like 50 times the value of what I'm offering it for. My coach told me I was crazy, but I've really wanted to reach as many people as possible to be able to give them the specific tools that I usually reserve for my intimate coaching packages. So head to mindlove.com/living to check it out. That's mindlove.com/living. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.